companies or in even in our normal for normal users, we may also experience such kind of data breach or security issues. So recently, actually, Facebook also had some very big data breach incident. So about 15 million people's account actually leaked or even controlled by the attacker. So this kind of attack actually can be based on some of the technology you will see in this subject. So these are very practical attacks performed by the attackers, but the fundamental principles may be related to the concepts we will study in this subject. So they are not directly related to crypto items or the content you studied in other subject, but they may be related to the content actually we cover in this subject. Okay, so why information security or system security is important? Of course, we need to protect our computer or our database, because we want to make sure our information is well protected from the attackers or even from some other insiders of the company, right? So, for example, intrusion detection. Sometimes we want to detect some intrusion performed by the insiders. All right. So, from the user's viewpoint, so if we have any a security breach or data breach, then the cost actually can be in different aspects. For example, you can have monetary loss. For example, sometimes if you have successfully hacked into, if someone can successfully hack into your account, then basically you may have a monetary loss. For example, your bank account. But on the other hand, sometimes actually we can also have some other damage. For example, if we say every time we hear that there is a data breach or security breach for a particular company, then the reputation of the company actually will also be damaged. Maybe the stock price of the company will drop. So, for example, when nowadays we all hear the term blockchain, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin very frequently. However, whenever, say, someone has hacked the Bitcoin system or someone has successfully stolen some Bitcoins from particular accounts, then the price actually will drop significantly. So in such kind of attacks, actually the monetary loss and also the reputation, the damage of the reputation of the company or the system can be huge. And then every year, actually, some security agency and also some security companies like Symantec, they will produce a yearly report to basically present the current active attacks. So if you go to the Moodle site, I have put a link where you can find all the security reports. So the reports includes reports from the agencies and also from security companies. So you can look at the current trend in the security, system security, and then also the active attacks available. Right. So if you use computer, actually you will find attacks. Some attacks vary frequently. For example, so some issues related to your personal, even for personal use computers, actually they can be attacked. So one typical example is this ransomware attack, right? So actually it affected many students in Australia. So in Australia, a lot of students, their computers were locked by the attackers, and then they need to pay this ransom payment in order to unlock the machine. Right. So and you also have experience with malware, phishing, spam, all these kind of security issues related to personal use. Even for individuals, we can have this kind of security issues. So the computer security is no longer an issue about the government or the companies. Even for individual users, we can have we can be affected by computer security issues. Alright, so of course sometimes people will just do the hacking for fun. So these are the examples for such cases. So in particular, some university students, they like to do this kind of hacking just for fun. However, so sometimes this can also still can cause like a problem to the end users. Right, so why people hack other like systems or computers? Because they want to steal the information. So the information actually nowadays can be sold by hackers to many hackers. For example, the phishers, like the phishing attackers, they may collect such the information from the hackers. So they may, if the hacker can successfully breach the system and obtain the user accounts, like the user information, then this information can be sold to attackers. Like the phishing email, actually nowadays, those phishing attackers, they will try to locate a target, a specific target. We call this kind of phishing like spear phishing. So they will locate a specific target based on the information they actually collect from some like hackers. Right, so you can see there are a lot of information that can be sold to the attackers. Okay, so most of the attacks actually are nowadays related to network because the attacker will basically try to exploit the vulnerability through different systems which have internet or network connection. So, for example, one typical attack which is directly related to network is denial of service. Right, so this kind of attack basically will affect the so-called availability of the system. So if you have a lot of like traffic generated by the attacker, then this kind of attack will essentially slow down the system or even crash the system. So this is one topic we will study in the subject. And then there are some other attacks related to network, like virus, bombs, Trojan horse, and so on. So this is in general we call them malware. So we will also study the malware as another topic. And the problems like spam, phishing, and so on. Okay, so these are also related to the network because the phishing attackers or spammers, they will use the internet to send these emails or send like fake links to the users. So we will look at all these contents in the subject. Right, so this picture illustrates actually the scope of the subject. So basically we will have first study some fundamentals. So the fundamentals are related to authentication and access control. So these two actually are the most important component in system security. Later, when we look at all the attacks and all the defense technologies, essentially we are trying to enforce authentication and access control. Basically, the attackers will try to disable or bypass the authentication and access control. But for the defenders, we try to enforce these two security mechanisms can be effective. So can be ineffective. So that means the attackers and the defenders, they try to basically they always try to compete with each other. Right. So for the attacks, actually we will look at some specific attacks like buffer overflow. So this is one type of attack. For example, in buffer overflow, you can gain control of a computer by using this kind of attack. Right. So in particular, when you have an executable file, if you use this kind of buffer overflow, you can run some additional command or additional program on top of the normal program. So for example, you can actually run a shell with root access when you actually invoke a program which is owned by the root user. So we will see how this can be done by using buffer overflow. Then if you gain the root access and then open a shell, then you can do anything. Right? You can change, you can create new users, you can modify other users' account and so on. Right? Then the denial of service attack. Right? So the denial of service attack is some attack against the availability. And then we will look at, in general, there are two different types of denial of service attacks. Right? Some may just crash the system. Some may make the system very slow. So we will look at this kind, how to prevent these kind of attacks. And then the malicious code. So actually, the malicious code. Sometimes we will see this is mainly the malicious code. Sometimes actually is virus, like worms and the Trojan horse. These are the malicious code. And on the other hand, we also have like non-malicious code, but very like vulnerability codes. So those are codes written by the honest users, but they are vulnerable. So they can be exploited by using like buffer overflow or other attacks. Then malicious code are the code which has a malicious intention. So we will look at like how to categorize virus, worms, Trojan horse, and so on. And then, for example, there are some other attacks like phishing attacks, right? So these are some popular attacks we will see in our normal use of the computer systems. And for the defense technology, so we will look at like intrusion detection, auditing. So these are techniques that can be used to detect whether there is any attackers. And then client puzzle, so this is to prevent like the denial service attack. Right, so we will look at, actually this is related to a so-called proof of work. So the technique used in client puzzle actually is also used nowadays by many blockchain applications like Bitcoin and so on. So they use the same proof of work underlying the client puzzle. So we will look at those techniques, and then actually I will also briefly introduce how blockchain works, and then how the proof of work in client puzzle actually is applied in blockchain and in Bitcoin. And then good coding practice. This is to prevent the vulnerabilities, right? Firewalls. So this is like intrusion prevention systems. So we will look at all these components. Right, so from the theories and principles to the practical attacks, and then the defending technologies. So as I said, so the attackers basically they will try to violate the authentication and access control, but the defenders they will try to enforce these security mechanisms are in place and in effect. And then we will look at these problems across different environments. So these kind of attacks. So the attacks and the defending technologies actually can occur in different environments, like operating systems, networks, like database servers, web servers, and so on. So we will look at in general, we will look at the fundamental theories and principles, and then we will see how to apply those principles in specific environments. For example, in OS, how do we enforce access control, authentication, and then in other systems, how do we do that? All right, so this picture illustrates the scope of this subject. So the detailed content and the schedule of the lectures, so it's listed here. So we have the introduction. Today we will finish the introduction and then the user authentication part. So user authentication, we will look at we will start with a very simple user authentication mechanism, which is a password-based user authentication. So although it's very simple, however, so actually the behind this authentication mechanism, there are still a lot of important issues and a lot of issues and important like concepts and principles. For example, we will also look at, for example, how do we store the user password. So actually we don't store the plain password, but we store some transform password. Right, so we will look at how this user authentication is done in like Windows and Unix systems. And access control, so similarly we will look at some general principles. So then after we look at the models, we can have different models. Like a user, for example, we can use in Windows and Unix, we use, for example, ACL, access control list. Right, so in some other system, we can use capability-based access control. And then we may also have more advanced access control systems, like a role-based access control, multi-level access control, and so on. So we will look at all those models used by access control, and then we will look at some specific examples in Windows systems and the Unix or Linux systems. So we will look at, for example, how does Windows perform the authorization for the resources, and then how does Unix enforce the access control using like ACL and using other mechanisms. And after that, we will look at denial service attack. So this is a particular attack that actually will affect availability of the system. That means the attackers try to either slow down the system or like crash the system. And then we will look at what are the general attacks, what are the specific some examples about resources that can be targeted by the attackers. So some resources can be like CPU, memory, network, and so on. So we will look at different types of denial of service attacks against the different resources. And then the protection method, we will look at some a popular method used by different operating systems. We will look at CQT, which is one of the methods used by Unix, and then also the client puzzle. So we have, I just briefly explain. So actually the client puzzle is based on so-called proof of work. And then we will look at this, how this same mechanism actually is used in blockchain and Bitcoin for doing mining, how to do the mining based on the proof of work. So we will look at the how this method actually is designed and how we can do this kind of proof of work. And then buffer overflow. So this is one of the common mechanism used by the attackers. So the buffer overflow basically will overwrite the buffer. So overwrite the memory. That's why we call it buffer overflow. It can happen in, for example, in the stack. So in the memory stack, in the memory heap. So we can have overflow. So the buffer here can be the stack of a particular procedure function, or it can be the heap. Where we store dynamic variables and so on. So if we have this kind of buffer overflow happens, then the attacker sometimes may gain control of your machine, right? So for example, it can just open a new shell, or it can invoke another program which is not supposed to be executed. So when you give for example, when the attacker executes one program, actually if you can exploit the buffer overflow, this vulnerability, then in the program, then it may run another program which is not supposed to be executed, or it may just open a shell and then actually perform any function, any operations on behalf of the root user. So this is one common attack used by hackers. And this buffer overflow actually can be related to other attacks. For example, in the denial of service, we will look at the so-called ping of S. That's a very old and a typical denial of service attack, but that attack actually is based on buffer overflow. And then for some malware, they can also use buffer overflow. So we will look at some, for example, worms. Some worms, actually they can use buffer overflow to propagate among the different machines in the network. So we will look at the relationship between buffer overflow and other security issues. So mobile code security, we will look at mobile code security, we will look at some security issues related to the so-called mobile code. Mobile code is not related to mobile device. So these are the codes that can be executed on different platforms. So that's why we call it mobile code. It's not like a mobile device security. So we look at some common a mobile code, for example, for all the programs related to web. Actually, most of them are mobile code. For example, we will look at the JavaScript, PHP, and so on. So all those codes that can be executed across different platforms, we call them mobile code. And then we will look at the security issues, how the attackers can exploit vulnerability in those code, and then how do we defend against those attacks. So the malware, this is another major class of the security problems. We will look at the virus, worms, Trojan horse, and then other types of malware ransomware. We will also have a look at the ransomware. Actually, like the WannaCry, right? WannaCry is one typical example of the ransomware. So we will look at those malware in this topic. And then intrusion detection. So this is another major part. So assignment 3 will be related to intrusion detection. So intrusion detection means we actually failed to enforce authentication and access control. So if this happens, for example, the attacker bypasses the authentication or access control mechanism, how do we detect whether this is a normal user or a intruder? So here we are no longer like assuming the attacker has no reach to the user credentials. We assume that the attacker has bypassed authentication. For example, the attacker maybe obtained the user credentials through another method. For example, you can use phishing to obtain the user credentials, like the username password. So in this case, the attacker has logged into a system using the correct credential. So in this case, the authentication and access control cannot work anymore because we cannot use those mechanisms to prevent the attacker because the attacker has already got all the information for the normal user. So in this case, we need to use intrusion detection. So intrusion detection actually is based on statistical method. So we will look at some intrusion detection mechanism based on statistics. So basically, we monitor the behavior of the user after the user logged in. So by monitoring the behavior, we can detect whether this is a normal behavior or abnormal behavior. So we can define like a profile for the user. Then by monitoring the behavior of a particular user, we can see whether this is consistent with the profile or it is not consistent. So we can use statistical method to detail whether this user logged in is actually an intruder or a legitimate user. So this is basically what we can do after the attacker has obtained, for example, the user credential. And then firewall, this is essentially an intrusion prevention system. So they can firewall can be linked to intrusion detection. So once the intrusion is detected, then, for example, if we notice there is an intruder, and the intruder is actually from the network, from a particular address. For example, from this particular address, there is a remote login, and then actually this is the intruder. Then actually the firewall now can block such kind of connection. So we can use the firewall to block all the connections which are raised by, which are detected by the intrusion detection system. Right. So this is we will look at the different types of firewalls. So if you study 368, you probably still remember in TCP/IP we have different layers: application layer, transport layer, network layer, right? IP layer, so data link layer, and physical layer. So for all those layers, we can have firewalls. So we can have different firewalls, and they will perform different functionality. So some of them will filter the packet based on the application data. Some of them will do the filtering based on the maybe TCP, the transport layer information, and some will do the filtering based on the IP layer. So we will look at different types of firewalls that can do filtering based on different TCP/IP layers. And the last topic will be database security. So we will look at, for example, SQL injection, how to do the injection attack using SQL, malicious SQL command. And then we will also look at the statistical database, how to perform the so-called inference attack. So sometimes even we only allow statistical information or so-called non-sensitive information to be queried by the user, but the user may still be able to derive sensitive information from the non-sensitive data. Right? So we will look at how to prevent those kind of inference attack. That means the attacker may try to infer some sensitive information from non-sensitive data. How to prevent that kind of attack. So we will look at in database security. All right, so these are the topics we will cover in this subject. So as you can see here, most of the topics are quite practical. So they are very closely related to our daily use of computer systems or database systems. And there are not much mathematics involved in these topics. So the mathematics we will see probably we will use will only occur in this protection method for denial of service, where we will see this client puzzle. So client puzzle, again, we will see some statistics And then in intrusion detection, we will again see some very basic statistics. But for other topics, actually we don't need to deal with very complicated mathematics. Okay, so that's quite different from the 361 and the 368. Right, so in general, for the this subject, so as I said, we want to basically enforce authentication and access control. So by using authentication and by enforcing authentication and access control, we try to achieve three security goals. One is confidentiality. So basically, we only allow authorized users to access information. Right. So if the user is unauthorized, then the user cannot access the information. And the integrity, right? So only the authorized user, only authenticated and authorized user can modify the data, right? So unauthorized modification will be prevented or detected. And then availability, so this is related to denial service. So in 361 and 368, actually we don't really see a lot of tools or techniques that can provide availability, but in this subject we will see some mechanisms that can be used to achieve availability. So this is to prevent the attackers from either crashing the system or making the system like a very slow, right? So okay, so as I mentioned, the two aspects we want to enforce is authentication and access control. So, but sometimes people will mix these two concepts together, right? So many people, they will just assume like authentication and authorization they are one single like a concept. But actually, these are two different concepts. So authentication is about the identification. So we want to identify who the user is, right? So then we use password or use fingerprint or use other mechanism, for example, like a hardware token and so on, to do authentication. So we identify who the user is, and then authorization is about access control. So what the user can do after we know the identity of the user. So maybe so Alice is a manager, and then Bob is just like a normal like a programmer, but they can be both authenticated users. However, they have different authorization. They have different like access control. So Alice, as a manager, may inherit all the like rights of Bob, but on top of the like all the permissions of Bob, Alice may have additional permissions. So in this case, so actually we can use we are talking about access control instead of simply authentication. So we will look at these two aspects first. So we will look at some principles and then also some mechanisms for authentication. And similarly, we will look at the principles, models, and so on, and some like practical examples about access control. Then after that, so later when we study other topics, so you will see essentially for other topics covered in the subject, they are related to these two, because all the attackers, they basically try to bypass or violate these two security mechanisms. But for the defenders, we will try to enforce these two mechanisms. So we will look at we will look at these two aspects in different contexts. So that's basically what we will study in this subject. So in summary, basically we can summarize system security as a control of access to resources, right? So that's basically a very quick introduction about the subject content, right? So again, any question so far? Any question? Right, so if no question, then we will start the first topic. So the first topic is about authentication. And actually we will start with a very simple authentication mechanism, which is a password-based authentication. So I think all of you have a very